recovery really has brought me a lot. From being a kid that was isolated, that was in, abusive situations and hid from who she was and what she looked like. So that question, were there parts of you that hid to find safety? That was me. Well, it's that time again for another episode of Cruising on the Edge, where there's real talk, real recovery, real purpose, and real results. I'm your host, Carol Cruz, and I am so grateful that you are here today. As you can see, I'm in a different space. I'm actually in my living room / dining room. I wanted to be in a little bit brighter area. My normal studio is in my bedroom with a little trifold screen in the back. But I wanted to share a little bit of who I am with my audience. And I'm really grateful that you are here today. So let's get started. So grab your favorite beverage. Maybe get a notebook, get comfortable, because we're going to still continue our conversation for Mental Health Awareness Month this May in regards to isolation. So first off, before I get into the deeper part of the topic of isolation today, I do want to just remind everyone that every month for the next 6 months, we're going to be doing Transformation on the Edge. So this month, we're finishing off with isolation. Next month, we're going to be talking about discovery. And then from there, connection, transformation, finding purpose, and then ultimately building legacy. So I will have a workbook, a link that will be in the show notes so that you can connect with that and do some work on your own. But I'm hoping that every episode going forward will be some kind of tidbit that you can take away to utilize in your own practice, in your own journey and healing, whatever it is that you need that may work for you. Again, you can take what I say today and pass on by, swipe on by, whatever you need to do. I would like you, if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe, share, like, and even comment. And let me know, if the material that I'm sharing, the content that I'm sharing today or any other day when through the podcast, even when I have guests on, please comment. Let me know how it's resonating or it's not. It's not. Like, Carol, you just missed a boat. Please stop talking. So let's move on. First, I'm going to address a question to you all, and you might want to write it down. If not, I will definitely have it in the show notes. But have you ever hidden parts of yourself behind a mask because it felt safer than being fully you? Well, I know that's a loaded question, and there have been several. And I'm just going to go back and I'm going to take a step back about 3 years ago. Actually, the end of the summer of 2021. It was actually September, and it was before the fall. And I moved out to Las Vegas. I had taken a job. I currently live in Connecticut, but I had taken a job at a recovery community center. A friend of mine who was the executive director and his husband really orchestrated and organized for me to get out there. I was part of their organization. Another part of their organization about mobilizing and not only providing resources for people and communities around recovery resources, around advocacy, around the politics around recovery. And when I say a recovery, it's around addiction recovery, but it could also be around mental health. So I'm still legally married, but at that time, I was in a 20-year marriage with my ex, and we were just not communicating. I am a person that is not able to stay still for a very long time. And I felt at that point I was 50, was 4 years ago. So I was 50, 59. I'm 63 now. No, I look good. So, I was 59 and I was just, I had graduated from college. I had gotten my associates in human services around behavioral health, same work that I do today. And I just wanted something different. I wanted something different. We were still just coming off the slope of COVID. And I got tired of being isolated and not feeling like I had purpose. And like I said, we're going to really address purpose later on in the next coming months. But I felt like I didn't have purpose. I didn't feel like I had anything. Like my son was grown. He was already in his 20s. My ex had his business. I was in and out of jobs, and at that time, again, it was towards the end of COVID. So, I was taking like subcontracting jobs, doing some coaching, recovery coaching, one-on-one coaching, things like that. But I still wasn't feeling fulfilled. I felt like my cup was running empty. And I got this offer. I applied and I had the interview via, again, video call. And I got the job and they accepted my offer. They also gave me a stipend, for travel. But there was a lot of things I had to do in a very short period of time. I had gotten hired in August of 2021, and I needed to get out there by, no later than the beginning of October. So it was, okay, what do I pack? What do I take? I wasn't going to take the furniture because it was in the house that, I had lived in for over 20 years with my ex. He was very supportive at the time, surprisingly. I don't want to speak for him, but at that time, he's always been a very everything has to line up. So he wanted to be supportive, but he also wanted me to know that that I still had a home to come back to in case something happened, right? And that I appreciated that. I really appreciated that. We don't have a traditional relationship. Like I said, um, we're still legally married, and we may still, we're not dating anyone right now, but we have this agreement that we are better friends than we are a married couple. We co-parent, our son, and we co-grandparent our grandchildren. My ex's son who lives out in Colorado. So we have another grandson out there. And so to get back to this move, I packed up my SUV with all the essential. My son actually took the drive out there with me, and it was just an amazing adventure. Something beyond my wildest dreams. At that time, also too, I was, 28 years, around 28 years in recovery. And, and my life was just, it was just different. I had saw a different side of myself that I hadn't thought I'd never see. I came from a place, with alcoholic parents. I came from a place of finding my identity as a person, not only as a woman, but as a person of color in recovery. There was so many stepping stones, so much growth that I felt that this was just the right time for me to make this huge transition, out to Las Vegas. My son and I, it took us about 4 days to drive out there. We saw a lot of beautiful landscape across America, in Colorado, Utah, Arizona. We hit all the spots, Reno. It was just an amazing adventure, especially to have with my son, who was a big part of my recovery story. And I was just really grateful that he took the journey with me. And when we got there, I had already had an apartment. I had at least a week before I had to start work, and I flew my son back to Connecticut so he can continue on with his life. And he and my ex, lived out their life. And I lived out mine. And I started this amazing job as a director of education and training for peer support specialists there in the state of Nevada. And I know I'm probably saying it wrong, so I'm still from Connecticut. So being out there, I didn't know a whole lot of people other than my my friends that had encouraged me to take the job and go there. And for 10 months, and I say 10 months because that was really the period of time that I was out there. And I didn't come back because I wasn't doing well. I didn't come back because I had failed at anything. If anything, I came back um, with the open thought that I was coming back for my family. My son had 2 months into my time there in Las Vegas. My son had called me and said, "Hey, mom, you're going to be a grandmother." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I thought I could be that jet set grandma and travel, back and forth to see my son and my grandchild as I thought. But then we found out there was twins, there was two sacks, and then we found out there was triplets on my first visit back home in February 2022. So fast forward in that process, it wasn't easy. One, trying to build a relationship with my daughter-in-law, and also, kind of meeting my son where he was at as this grown man who was about to be a husband and father. These were things that I could have never predicted for him in his future. But I was definitely over the moon. I was so happy, and I'm still happy for him. But I realized too that, uh, you know, relationships are hard, right? And they're not always, especially when you don't know the person very well, and you come from different sides of the earth in a sense. That's how, at least how it felt for me. But I tried my best, and I still feel like I tried my best in building a relationship with my daughter-in-law and with my son. And so I made the trip back here. Um, Unfortunately, I wasn't able to move back into the home, which I think it was a lot better. I know it was a lot better for me not to be, just because of the agreement my ex and I had before I had left. And so I found myself this beautiful little apartment near the water here in Connecticut. I felt like my mom, who has since passed, she passed around 27 years ago. But, I felt my mom had kind of dipped her toe into making sure that I was in a place where I was going to be safe and where I could grow and, continue on living this life that I've been really gifted with. And, recovery really has brought me a lot. From being a kid that was isolated, that was in, abusive situations, and hid from who she was and what she looked like. So that question, were there parts of you that hid to find safety? That was me. And that's why I put that question out there, is that was me. I hid from people. I got numb at a point where, it just hurt. It hurt to have relationships with people, because trust, I didn't trust people, especially adults, growing up. And when I found drugs and alcohol, I was like, oh, okay, I can trust this. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to, it took me away from, um, it isolated me. It isolated me to wanting to ever build relationships. Everything that I showed on the outside was what I thought you wanted me to be, or who you wanted me to be. And then I would, crawl back into my little dark space and hide, and just hide. I'll just take a pause for a minute because that kind of felt a little something, something right there. Mm. So landed back here in Connecticut in this beautiful little space and started to decorate it, but I didn't get the welcome home mom or the welcome home Carol that I thought I should. Yeah, yeah, I should on myself. That was, in September of 2022. And I, not having, connecting with my daughter-in-law, not connecting with my son, it seemed like anything that I approached them with was, pushed aside. I was cut off for quite a while, for a long time, where my son wouldn't even have a conversation with me. He wouldn't look at me. I didn't know. What was I doing wrong? Did I say something? Did I hurt her in some way? What did I do? And I realized I started to go back to old behavior and old thinking. I remember saying when my mother would drink all night and then she would sleep all day. And my stepfather, would be like, well, don't wake her up. She's gonna drink, she's gonna be mad at you. And I felt like I was put in a position of being responsible for other people's feelings. And that feeling came up again with my son and my daughter-in-law. Not being able to see my grandchildren. I saw them very briefly after they first came home from the hospital, and then there was months that I hadn't seen them. Little bit here and there. I was invited to the dedication, which was grateful. I was invited to their first birthday, but there were rules and barriers and stipulations that prevented me from really embracing them physically and emotionally. Because what happens when you're, presented with the responsibilities of holding somebody else's grief or holding even somebody's happiness and or suffering, and there's no room for you to hold anything for yourself. It feels really isolating. And it did for me. There are periods of times, and since, now we're in 2026 and things have changed, but I was in a period of darkness from that period of time in 2022 to pretty much the beginning towards the end of 2024. It's only been about a year and a half um, that I really feel that sense of confidence or confidence again in myself, like I did, in other parts of in my recovery from drugs and alcohol. Um, I definitely felt at sometimes uh, maybe I should go out and get back to that place of numbing because I couldn't control anything outside of me. And at that point, too, I couldn't even control how I felt about me and the situation. So I wanted to go crawl back in and hide. And what better place to start? It's picking up a drink or picking up a drug. At this point, I'm close to, 29, 30 years. And I didn't even think I was going to make it through one day of sobriety. But life had other means for me. And even though I couldn't have the relationship that I wanted with my family, I had to start taking a deeper dive into what I needed to do n- and learn to love myself unconditionally again because I was questioning everything, everything, even when I started a job, and I was lucky. I found a job online where I was working with people with disordered eating and eating disorder. Another part of that I've been in recovery from for quite a while. I used food as a tool, as a numbing to push people away. So, food was actually the first thing that I indulged in and became obsessed and addicted to. And I got very large and I was miserable, unhappy. And when I came back from Vegas, I wasn't using drugs and alcohol, but I was definitely using food and anger. Ooh, anger. Oof. Anger was something that just kept coming up here and it was just ugh, and I kept trying to stuff it. So I would eat, eat, eat. I would watch TV. I would try to distract myself, if I wasn't working. It was hard to be there for other people. I didn't want to be there for other people. I was barely there for myself. So when I said it got dark, Christmas Eve of 2023, I also discovered that my ex had been kind of hanging out with his ex. And at the time, deep down, I believed it to be innocent, but I didn't trust anybody. If you told me it was innocent, I made up another story because I was justified. I had justifiable anger. I justified how I was feeling. And I was let go of on a board of the organization that I had been mobilizing with for at least 4 years at this point. I had showed up in DC. A lot of that, I feel like I was in a blackout because the way I showed up, the way I acted towards others and spoke to them, I deserved to be asked to come down from the board. So that was what was happening. Things were being stripped. I was being stripped of certain responsibilities. I also got laid off from my job. I was in this hollow place where all I could hear is the echo of my somewhat breathing. I don't really think I was, I talk about, doing breath work. And if you're not using your full breath, you're not bringing oxygen to your brain. And there was very little breath that was, generating through these lungs and being able to sift through anything that made sense in my head. And this went on for some time. I finally found a therapist, but then she changed practices. So I went without a therapist for a while, and it was all telehealth. I had never met her in person. I finally went on Psychology Today and found myself another therapist. And as I wrap up this part of my story to move through some questions and some other readings that I'd like to share with you today. Through all that period of time, I was journaling. And I had been journaling before, but sporadically. Some days I would miss. And I was like, okay, it's okay. Or just write down a couple lines. But I really don't feel like then the things that I was journaling were really authentic or true. I think I was just doing it just to do it. Now I really I dive into my journal. It's what I start my day off. I have a little dining room table over there, and I have my coffee in the morning. I can see during the winter times when the bushes are a little, um, where you can see through them. I can see the water. Uh, but I started to hear the birds when I would sit there with my coffee in the morning, and I would look out and watch the people jogging by or riding their bikes or, you know, strolling with their babies. And I would cry and I would wail and then I would get angry and I would pounce my hand on the table and I'm like, why is this happening to me? Why? All the work that I have done. I'm, close to 30 years in recovery. My mother was in recovery and I know there was many things that she wanted to do before she passed. She passed at 69 years old. And I started looking at myself in the mirror and I'm like, Carol, you look old. Carol, I stopped taking care of myself. I wasn't going out and talking to people. I really went inside and I thought, if I just keep, if I could just keep moving, and every once in a while I would get a text from someone and I don't have a handful of people that I reach out to, but I had, my friends in Vegas and my girlfriend in Colorado, who at one point I thought I had really effed up our relationship. But, that's what good friendships are. Sometimes they need to call you out, and which my friends did. I had a few people that called me out and said, "Hey, there's some changes that you need to make, you know, and you need to keep doing the work." And Christmas Eve of 2023 was, I believe, a huge breaking point for me. And I say this during Mental Health Awareness Month because I also work for a crisis call center, as I've shared other times in other podcasts. And my desk is right over there. And today's my day off. And I was getting, before I started that job, I had suicidal thoughts. And that Christmas Eve, when I had discovered some things that hurt my heart was so hurt. I felt betrayed. I felt I betrayed myself. How could I have let myself, with all the things that I know about recovery, how did I let myself get to this point? I realized also, too, I was grieving those parts of myself in my early recovery. I was trying to use the same tools in my early recovery as I was trying to use or trying to pick up again here in 28, 29 years old, 28, 29 years of recovery. It's different. My son had grown. He's now married, children. My ex was older. Our relationship had split in a lot of ways, lack of communication, other things. I had changed. I had grown, but I didn't see those parts of myself. So that night, I went on the phone. When you might have heard this from people that are in active addiction, that all of a sudden, they start picking up the phone and making random calls. Well, that was me, because I wasn't high on drugs, but I was high on anger. And boy, it was, it felt good. It felt good until it didn't. It didn't serve me anymore. And I just wanted someone to tell me it was okay to go, because I was too afraid to listen to that inner voice. And that inner voice wasn't little Carol. That inner voice was that part of me that was so dark and had given up, that wanted to not isolated anymore. I just didn't want to be here. Somehow I got myself home because I was spinning. Literally, I was driving around. Was at my girlfriend's house in Norwalk, and somehow I drove myself home, screaming and yelling at above the radio, driving around my ex's house, looking for him, looking for his ex, looking for anybody that I could tell off, that I could scream at. And I ended up back here at home. I sat on the couch, it's right here, and I just cried. I cried, I wailed, I stomped. You would have thought if you were hearing me outside my door, you would have thought, you know, uh, somebody had died. And that's really what it was. The part of me that had gone back inside to deal with those layers of trauma and grief and disappointment and anger and fear that was driving it all. That's where I had to start. That's where I had to start. So that is that part of my story. There's lots of parts, and I'm putting a lot of it in my memoir, Into Me I See. And today, things aren't perfect, especially what's going on in the world. I don't get out as much as I should, and I'm not going to should on myself, but I am still slowly but surely moving my way into uh, places, back into places where one, doing this podcast has brought me to interviewing, um, going traveling again. I'm traveling this summer to Atlanta, and then December back to Vegas for a conference. But I'm also being I don't like to use the word cautious, but just being aware. I'm being very aware to what energies I want to bring into my life, because I don't want to get back to that place of um, isolating.